So, George, welcome to the podcast. Introduce yourself to everybody.
Hey, Andy. Thanks so much for having me on. My name is George Hayek. I go by Geo. I am the founder of Trinsec7. We're the first faith-based security company that specializes in both cybersecurity and physical, like electronic security, for small businesses and families.
That's really cool. That is very niche and unique. I like it. So, Gio, what kind of got you started in security? How have you ended up here?
Sure. Well, I think by God's grace alone, but I've had a long career starting off in local law enforcement actually, and there was a burglary call actually that really I think set the course for my entire career. We essentially showed up, thought it was just like every other burglary, but there was something different, and it was the victims this time. As the responding officer, I was really concerned with catching the bad guy, and that was my entire focus. Every question I asked, everything that I wanted to know was about that, like things that would help me put together who these people could be and how we're going to catch them. But what changed and what was different about this was the victims didn't care about that. They didn't care about my response to their crime or to, the crime that they were victims of. Instead, they wanted to know how they could have prevented it. That was a huge departure from the way things normally went in these circumstances. So essentially, I had a humbling moment where I all of a sudden wasn't the expert anymore. And, their doors were locked, their windows, their blinds were closed and everything. And I didn't really know what else to tell them. As embarrassing as that was, that sort of set the path for my career. And I kind of made it my mission, after that to become an expert in security so that we could prevent these things. And from local law enforcement, I ended up going into the federal government. Really, I've done a lot of different things, but it all sort of circled around counterintelligence, which is basically the practice of protecting people, places, and information. And most recently, I was a senior special agent also for the government. But I really I'm taking the mindset and practice of piecing together crimes after they happened as a special agent and applying that same mindset to preventing them from happening now with Trinsec7.
So, you do a lot of stuff for families, which I think is wonderful, and you do these security assessments among like a bunch of other stuff that you just mentioned. Explain why a security assessment is important for the average family.
Sure. Well, our security assessments are really our bread and butter. And aside from the fact that we do both cyber and physical, I think that's what differentiates us from a lot of the different security vendors out there, if you will. So in the government, we like to say that intelligence drives operations. In this case, the operations are our security program and the strategy that we deploy to protect, what means the most to us. So in fact, I think that without intelligence, how do you know what you're actually protecting, or furthermore, what you're protecting it against, right?
Sure, I get
So
that.
it's my belief, and kind of where all this started. I think that unfortunately, the most vulnerable among us are our families or small businesses. We're sort of sold a false sense of security a lot of times, with our doorbell cameras and our free or very cheap antivirus software. Because at the end of the day, these things are rooted not against a specific threat, right? Or to protect anything specific. It's just, I think these companies are more like marketing companies that are kind of disguised as security companies, and whatever it is they're selling, you need, right? Instead of actually looking at the person. So we do things a lot different. We start with learning about the actual family. I'll give you an example on this front. With me, I was leading some pretty sensitive investigations at one point in my career, and it got to the point where I wanted to improve my security for my family at my home. I reached out to several different vendors. Many of them didn't even get back to me. And I'm talking about just basic alarms, cameras, different things like that around my house. I didn't want to go with a do-it-yourself thing. I thought they were too cheap and just didn't really trust them because of that. But reached out to some professional companies. Most of them didn't get back to me. One of them blindly, without even asking anything about what I wanted, just sent me a quote. That was basically it. Another one, people actually showed up, which I respected, but never once even asked about me, right? Never asked like, hey, what do you do for work? How many kids do you have in your house? Like different things like that, which is really important information, because you have to be able to build a program around the uniqueness of the person you're building the program for. Furthermore, you have to understand the threats that they face specifically, because what your threat landscape looks like is very different than mine, right? Your
Right.
exposure to different things is different than mine. So we take all of that into consideration and then obviously look both physically and digitally. So we look at people's digital footprints, everything they post, and all of that to try to understand their full risk exposure. And then we build programs around that.
I agree with you about the whole these are just marketing companies that are selling security, that sort of thing is a lot of times I tried to change how the internet looked at, alarm systems because they're not really security systems, they're alarm systems. And nobody wanted to follow me on that one. So, but yeah, like all these companies are like, it's an alarm. That's all it is. It's not security. You're only as safe as you make yourself. Having an alarm is a great idea. Don't get me wrong, but it's as I say on this show, your safety is your own responsibility. So I respect that you're sitting here saying that, hey, yeah, you've kind of been sold some stuff here, and it may not be with your best interest in mind.
I like that, Andy. If it's okay with you, I think I'll steal that. I'll join you in that fight, in that
Okay, yeah, it's
messaging.
an alarm system. From now on, it's an alarm system.
Like
All right. So, kind of walk me through what sort of threats should parents be thinking about? What is this physical? Is this digital? Is this emotional? What do we mean by threat in this situation?
well, to answer your question specifically, unfortunately, we have to talk about some different terms, which are really important when you're actually assessing your threat and kind of doing that intelligence cycle, right? So, first of all, threats, the term threat is simply anything that could cause you harm. Now, on the other side of that, you have threat actors. Those are the people behind it. So the threat of, say, burglary, right,
Mhm.
is the action that a burglar, the threat actor, would take against you. So, in that same vein, people conflate risk with threats. Risk is really the intersection of threats, vulnerabilities, and impact. When you're talking about families, and I do these assessments all the time. So this is a big thing for me. And I won't bore your listeners with the actual calculation that we use to come up with people's risk. But when it comes to families, impact is always massive, right? So consider
Mhm.
that 100. So then what that leaves us with is we have to look at the threats, which is what you're asking about, but then also our vulnerabilities. On the threat side, it's crazy because we're faced with more threats than ever before in history. And we have to look physically, right? So at the burglaries, the robberies, just vandalism, right? I mean, there's so many crazy statistics out there, and I think like 91% of them are made up anyways. But the truth is though, property crimes are through the roof, right? I
Mhm.
think one of the stats that the FBI puts out is a property crime occurs every 4 seconds. Right. So
Mm.
anything from broken window to spray painting, different things like that. I think that's still different than actual like violent threats like
Right. Right.
robbery or different assault stuff, but we have to consider those as well. And then, I think the elephant in the room is on the cyber front. And what's really different about security today that frankly the security industry, these marketing companies that are pretending haven't caught up with is because the threat landscape, like even in cyber, you have multiple different threat actors that are working against us. So on like the cyber crime front, you have entire industries built around just simply access to your accounts. They're called
Mhm.
initial access brokers. People don't understand that, when we're ransomware or our identity is stolen, different things like that, the person that got actual access to our accounts is oftentimes not the person benefiting from the
Mm.
attack,
Right.
right? It's crazy. So you have the whole cybercrime element like that. It blurs with the scammers, right? That's another facet of this. But then you also have the predators. You have these crazy groups like Group 764 and all the stuff that happens on the dark web that is just purely evil at its core, right? But unfortunately, we are exposed to that more today than ever before. So that's what we're looking at when we're looking at assessing the threats. We're looking holistically at all.
I agree with a lot of stuff you just said, but I want to key on one of the last things that you said here. What is 764, and do we really need to be worried about it?
Yeah, unfortunately, in my professional opinion, I think you do. So 764 is, I think, a modern day take on a satanic cult. Unfortunately, it's empowered and sort of enabled by what they're able to accomplish through the internet. So 764 started off as this demented teen with too much time on his hands that essentially coaxed people into hurting themselves, hurting other people, and did it all for enjoyment. But really, the reason, and frankly, there's a lot of bad people out there and bad places out there that encourage that kind of behavior. But the thing that makes 764 different is law enforcement's ability to track them because of the way they operate. There's no money being exchanged. There's no drugs being exchanged or weapons or anything like that. Instead, the commodity is their belief that the more harm they're able to accomplish in society, the more power they have. We're back to that satanic, ritualistic ideology that they live and operate under, unfortunately. So that's really hard to track, is my point, right? They start off in benign scenarios such as like Minecraft. They'll meet people there, different online places, gaming environments, and different things like that. And they look for the most vulnerable victims possible. So a kid that is maybe depressed because their parents got divorced and says something about that, right? That's the kind of thing they key in on because they know this child is left vulnerable and exposed. And they key in on that. And then what happens is they start this entire cycle of blackmailing them. And right, they get all this incriminating evidence against them, derogatory things, whether it be pictures or videos of them doing things. And they actually force them then to do terrible things like injuring pets or injuring themselves, taking explicit photos of themselves or videos, different things like that, that then they use that to blackmail them down the road. And what happens is this sort of triggers this really vicious cycle where the abused then becomes the abuser. They really want to become that thing they feared most. And that's what makes it so sick and sort of perpetual in its nature. So.
Right. Yeah, and that's horrific. I think that's kind of every parent's nightmare right now. We've known for a long time that anytime a predator encounters a child online, that the predator automatically has the advantage of being an adult, having done this over and over again, that sort of thing. For the parent who is now hearing this and kind of panicking over 764, what are some basic things that parents can do right now to protect their kids?
Yeah, that's a really good question. First, I think you have to figure out what exactly you're protecting. And I know that you just asked, okay, we're protecting our kids. That's great. But there's a big difference between protecting your kid in their bedroom versus protecting your kid when they're asleep, right? We have to consider every aspect of what it means to protect our kids. So I gave two examples, right? Like we're in the home, there's difference between time of day, whether or not they're sleeping, if they're awake, what's going on in the home, when we have to be protecting them. But again, things are further complicated by we also have to protect them in cyberspace. So we unfortunately give them a phone and a computer and all of these different things which play critical roles in their day-to-day lives that are innately but benign by design. Unfortunately, those are the exact same vectors the bad guys use to then reach them, right? So again, that comes down to understanding, okay, we're protecting our kids, but what are the attack surfaces that the bad guys are going to reach them through? Now we have to protect against all of that. So we're right back to that intelligence cycle and things like the Secure Dad podcast and everything that you have put out. Frankly, a lot of your free resources and everything like that raises up parents' awareness. And I think that is exacerbated by understanding the intelligence, right? When you can you pair the best security practices with current threat intelligence and everything like that, I think that puts the parents worlds ahead of where they were, without understanding what the threat landscape looks like and everything like that.
Sure, and I appreciate your kind words there. And I think the fact that people are listening to this show, listening to you and everything that you have to say, does put you in a great spot to be able to take care of your kids. And I've seen a lot of times that the answer to digital threats is actually physical. That is, being in the same room with your kids when they're online, setting up where they can and can't take their phones, understanding, the apps that they're using, the permissions that their phone has, all that sort of stuff, the settings that you have on your router. Those are kind of like physical things that you can do to solve a digital problem. Because I know you've probably encountered this so much with families, like they're like, oh, I don't know about anything to do on the internet or how to, keep my computer safe or whatever. And they just feel overwhelmed, right?
Yeah, very much. I mean, you bring up a really good point about being in the same room with the kids, but consider it down to where the kid's sitting and where they're angled, right? If you are able to see their screen, they're far less likely to do something. And this is where, unfortunately, like the wireless technology has made us more susceptible as well. And when it was just old desktops, right? And you could set it up on a wall and, the parents were sitting on the side where the kids had their back to the parents, but the screen was exposed, right? That made people less vulnerable, less vulnerable like that. So that's definitely something as well. But you bring up really good points with, having good firewalls, having a good, antivirus software and everything like that. So yeah, love that you said that.
Yeah, and what's funny is I've seen this. I didn't quite understand it at the time. I understand it now. But like when houses were being built in the 90s, in the kitchen, there was always that like little desk that was off in this dead corner of the kitchen, and that's where the family computer was supposed to go. And that's where like the one access point that everybody had to it. So everybody could see what was going on in the kitchen, that people were actually just building this little nook for the computer into the kitchen. And anytime I ever see that, I just have to laugh because it was just kind of a product of the times.
I love it.
Walk me through what your process is in creating an assessment for a family.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Again, just understanding that intelligence drives the operations. I know I keep saying that, but I think that's the biggest thing. So we go back to having that, we start off with that conversation, right? We want to understand who it is we're protecting. Then we get into what we're protecting them from so that we can be intentional with the program that we put in place, and truly create a strategy with that, because anything that is not risk informed decision making like that is purely guesswork. That's ultimately what it comes down to. So again, I go back to we first understand who it is we're protecting. That's the asset that we have to build our program around. Then we look at the threats, right? Who are the different threats, both physically and in cyberspace? And then from there, we go through a really robust process of looking at where they're vulnerable. So on the vulnerability front, these are basically the weaknesses in your current program or lack thereof that the bad guys will end up exploiting and using against you. So anything from weak passwords to maybe door locks that don't work or insufficient, different things like that. And so, when you consider this on the threat side, what are you going to do? In federal law enforcement, we had an advantage because it was easy to remove threats. You arrest them, right? You find them
Mm-hmm.
doing bad things and you're able to kind of take them off the board in that regard because, they face prosecution. But as families, we don't have that advantage. So instead, we have to focus our attention and efforts on minimizing our vulnerability. So again, locating where you're most likely to be attacked and how you're most likely to be attacked, and then doing things that rectify that. So having better passwords, having better protection on cyber, limiting the use in the physical world, like you're talking about with our kids and their devices, making sure, just going around simply and checking and making sure our doors are locked at night and our windows are locked and that there's nothing that people can access, even on the second floor to get into the second story
Mm-hmm.
window that might be open. You think it's good, but if you leave a ladder out there, then they can get out there and make it easy for them. So just removing things like that, I think is huge. But again, understanding that each one of those facets, so the threats, what we're protecting them against, right? That's the threat, but then also how they would attack us. The vulnerability side plays into the bigger picture right off the bat. I think the families listening to this are ahead of the curve just by understanding that.
And I think you kind of touched on this a second ago, but do you think families today are facing more complex threats than, say, 10, 20 years ago? If so, kind of tell me what's changed.
Yeah, 100%. I think that never in history have people been more susceptible to the threats. I can't, starting around 2016, 2017 is really when we started seeing nation states attacking small businesses and families, right? You had North Korea created a ransomware called WannaCry. And I mean, it was bad. And
Oh, yeah, I remember that.
you remember that. Yeah.
Yeah.
So all of those proceeds went directly to their nuclear program, right? So again, the first time sort of in history, well, actually, I take that back. You had Russia in attacking Georgia. There were cyber attacks, but it
Hmm.
wasn't for the same motivation. Okay. So what I'm talking about, to be clear here, is for financial gain, right?
Hmm.
We now have nation states attacking the smallest and most susceptible targets for their own financial gain. I mean, North Korea is now raising 5-year-olds to hack US families and small businesses, right? When has that ever happened before, right? And then you have the scammer side. We have opened ourselves up to so many different scams and everything. I mean, it's mind boggling to think now that, AI can be used to clone our voices, to give access to different things. I mean, it's horrific. And then I think probably the worst side of this, like we were talking about with 764, but on the predator front, the internet has enabled them and empowered them to reach more victims, um, masquerade themselves as something benign when indeed they're just pure evil, right? And again, they're able to do that now when they weren't able to do that as effectively even just 10 years ago, frankly, right? Through different apps that can change their pictures and change their voices and all these different things. I mean, that's wild. Now, on the physical front, physical crime is directly tied to the economy. The harder things are for people, the worse physical crime gets. And things are hard out there right now for people. So that's also something we have to be, aware of. But yeah, to your point, I think it's unrecognizable, the threat landscape than it was, just 5 years ago, even for that matter.
Sure. The common, advice was, if you get an email and it's in broken English and it comes from, it has this weird URL on it or whatever, that's totally a scam. And that was pretty easy to see. And with the invention of AI and how people are using it to translate what they're trying to do into perfect English and making URLs that look real or match somebody else's, like you're right, in the last 5 years alone, the scamming has just I feel like gone a light year.
Yeah, it's scary.
Yeah. So I want my family to be prepared but not paranoid. How do we strike that balance?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. I think the paranoia mindset has taken sort of a culture of itself. You have all these preppers out there and everything, and I think there's a place for that, sure. But I think to avoid paranoia, you have to first establish a baseline. So just good security hygiene, just good practices, things like, back to the simple things like having a good password, right? You should obviously do that because what you're doing is you're eliminating the 99% of the threats that are attacking, right? Just by having a good baseline, actually locking your doors. If a bad guy comes up, and this does happen, they'll go up to front doors, they'll knock. If anyone comes, they'll just try the front door. And if it's open, they've knocked, they've determined no one was there, they're able to go in because you left your front door open, right? So little things like locking the door, having strong passwords, just that good security hygiene, it should be your baseline. Beyond that, this is where the intelligence piece comes in. As you collect intelligence and understand that the threat landscape evolves minute to minute every day, if there's an increase in threats, maybe in your neighborhood, maybe there's a string of car break-ins right now, different things
Hmm.
like that. Now all of a sudden you have to take additional measure, right? So that's how we keep our security relevant to the current threats, while at the same time not being paranoid. So I think that's the key.
And speaking of the cars breaking in, that happened in my neighborhood not that long ago. And honestly, it's about time for it to happen again. But one of the things that I like to do from the intelligence aspect, and I'm sure you've done similar things, is I will go to next door. And next door always has somebody complaining saying, "Oh, these people are walking through the neighborhood at 2 in the morning and there's a picture of them." And that's when I think, okay, well, they were, in this neighborhood last night. They might be coming back through the area this week. So we need to take some extra precautions. That's the kind of little stuff you're talking about, right? And just making sure you understand what's going on.
Very much. When I'm doing my assessments, I have several next door accounts that I use to go out there, and I'll in some cases actually ask questions, different things like that. So yes, you're spot on with that. Obviously, Facebook, different community groups, and you shouldn't just be a member of your own community. You should join the communities around you, because it's reasonable to assume that if something happens in the community that's a mile down the street, it could happen in yours. Um, Now back to the cyber thing, because again, I'm sorry, but we look both. So you're absolutely right on all of that. But on the cyber front, you have to be doing things like, locking your credit, monitoring your credit,
Hmm.
obviously, and getting those alerts if something changes, but also looking for any sort of data exposures that might be, your username and password to some sensitive accounts and different things like that. So again, those are the things that's really good intelligence. If you learn that your stuff is exposed on the dark web, that, oh, it's time to change my username and password now, right?
Making sure that you have dark web monitoring
Yeah.
is very important. Um, so as we wrap up here, if you could give one piece of advice to the families that are listening right now about how to elevate their family safety, what would that be?
Yeah. So, I think the best thing I can leave people with is a security like model or framework. Frankly, it's the same exact model that I use to build programs for people, and it's really, again, I'm sorry I say it over and over again, but it's driven by intelligence, right? We have to understand what it is we're working for and against. But then it's 4 Ds after intelligence. So it starts with deterrence, goes into detection, then we want to delay them, then we want to defend. So to kind of break each one of those down a little bit more, when you're looking at deterrence, you want to make the bad guy see your house, but for some reason choose a different one, right? You want them to move on. Bad guys, much like us, they have to make decisions that are based on risk to reward ratios for them as well. So there's a lot of things we can do to deter them, and frankly, some of it is just not being inviting. I'll give you actually a really surprising example of some things I found in my research. Having lawn ornaments actually attracts people, and the reason is the bad guys see lawn ornaments and they think, oh, if these people have all this money to have lawn ornaments, I bet they even have nicer things on the inside, right? So little things like that we do to show pride in the homes that we work so hard for, they actually look at as like an opportunity, right? That's a cue to them. That draws them in. That's really big. So um, now, on the deterrent side, still in that same vein, there's so many things we can do that, not only don't invite them, like things like that we can do to kind of harden our posture that will then cause them to go somewhere else just because the risk seems too high. Right. So, and the best part, Andy, about all this stuff is it doesn't have to be expensive. It doesn't have to be elaborate. You can get fake security cameras for $10 on Amazon, right? And hang those up and have a really effective result against the bad guys that might be targeting the home. But, even just signage. Actually, speaking of signage, sorry, I've got another thing to throw out there for people.
Hey, it's
If you
good.
have,
That's why you're here, man.
yeah, thanks. So, if you have like a specific, marketing company, I mean, security company, of course, well, sort of alarm that you have on your home, don't put their signage up, because what that
Mm,
does is that allows bad guys to look up, hey, this person has XYZ security. Okay, how can I get around those cameras? Right? You're advertising what you have. Don't do that. Instead, I'm not even saying don't have that as an alarm. What I'm saying is change the signage. Go
hmm
get, professional, like commercial grade security surveillance signage up, and you put that up. Now all of a sudden they recognize that because that's a deterrence, but you're not giving them anything to go off of either. So the deterrent side, I mean, we could talk about this, all day long. But there's just so much that you can do. And in this, it's no different on the cyber side. Having really long passwords is a great way to deter people too. And having really good antivirus and some sort of managed detection response capability, which goes way beyond antivirus, is crucial. Quick plug for my company, but we're the first ones that offer that enterprise grade protection to small businesses and families that goes way beyond antivirus, frankly, for about the same price. So we've tried to make it extremely affordable so that everyone can benefit from that. So if it's okay, I'll take a break, and if you want, I can move on to the other facets of the model. Sorry to keep
Yeah.
rambling.
No, no, no. I think it was a great idea about, I actually learned, we had a police officer come to my school, maybe when I was in the second or third grade. This is way back in the 1900s. And he was like, at the time, I think very ahead of the game because he told us as like second or third graders, don't put the sign of the security company, or excuse me, the alarm company that you have out in the yard because somebody could call your house at 2 in the morning and say, "Hey, Mr. Murphy, your alarm is going off. What's going on? We're here to assist you. What do we need to call the police?" And of course, you're waking up, you're not hearing the alarm. And you're like, no, everything's fine. It's like, okay, sir. Well, if you will just tell us what your PIN code is so we can verify that it's you, we'll leave you alone. And you say it's 1, 2, 3, 4. And so now they just wait for you to leave. And then you know what the PIN code is to get into the house after they're gone. And some police officer out there who was really smart gave that like $1 million tip to a third grader who was now doing, secure dad stuff. So like that was just one of the things that helped me realize, oh, wait a minute. Some of the things that I advertise that I have could actually end up being detrimental.
I love it. Yeah, that's awesome. I haven't even heard of that, but I love that.
Yeah, apparently that was something that was happening a long time ago. Of course, now there's a lot more verification and things like that
Yeah.
that happen. But yeah, that was just kind of crazy. But what are the other aspects that you want to talk about?
So, okay, moving into like the second D now, which is detection. And with detection, I won't give another dissertation like with deterrence, but it's basically early indicators and warnings. So different things. And with the advancements in technology, frankly, now that these can even be cameras, right? When motion is detected, you get a notification, which gives you an opportunity to respond, right? Maybe it's to leave, maybe it's to call 911 or whatever it is, but you want to give yourself the maximum amount of time possible. And that's where protection is so important on that, why it's the second D. And then um, from there, we want to go into delaying the bad guy.
Mm-hmm.
So really the key to this side of the model is reducing the time on target a bad guy has. The idea here is that the more time a bad guy is spending trying to maybe get into your house or get into your account, the more likely they are to get caught. So their risk goes up. And the less time they're going to have actually inside of your house, which decreases their reward, right? To find where your master safe is and then get into the master safe or find whatever it is they're looking for. So that's huge. Now, the last D is defend in my model. And I'm in no place to give people legal advice. I always recommend, you have to understand what your local laws are, if you can use weapons, if an intruder, finds you or whatnot. But one of the things I always recommend on the defense side is coming up with emergency action plans that you actually rehearse with your family. You have to understand how your kids think in different situations. And you can only do that by role playing, and you can make it fun, right? You can play games with them. We do one with clients often, we call it Get Off the X, where, at random times, maybe you're just cooking in the kitchen together and you say, okay, get off the X. And then you give them a scenario. There's a guy, knocking loudly at the sliding glass door right now, back of the house, right? Which is weird because that means they had to walk all the way around.
Right.
And so what are you going to do? If I'm upstairs and your mommy's downstairs, what is your reaction going to be? And what this does is this allows kids to start thinking about, okay, where's the nearest cell phone? How do I communicate and find my parents? How do I assess this threat? Am I looking at if the bad guy at the door has anything in his hands like a weapon, right? Or, just different things like that. And, I found that the more and more you do this, the better your kids get at making the right decision when it counts the most. The last thing I'll say on this is a lot of models out there include the D to deny, right? They'll have some sort of sequence of different steps to this, and oftentimes denial will be one of them. I vehemently oppose this whole idea because I think that if you intend to deny a threat, you're only setting yourself up for failure, as it's literally the very nature of threats to circumvent the things that we impose against them, right? If you build a 30-foot wall, they're just going to bring a 35-foot ladder, right? So I think that, again, forget denial. You're never going to be able to deny everything. And instead, build a model out that works for you and your family. And I think that the one I gave, I think, is a really good starting place for most families.
Gio, there's a lot of good stuff in there. I mean, there's a lot of good stuff in there, and I appreciate that. I know that people listening are going to want to know more about you and your company. Where can they find you guys online?
Sure. So our website is www.trinsec7.com. So that's Trinsec and then the number seven. And my personal email is geo@trinsec7.com. And I'm always happy to help. So I obviously love talking about this stuff. So and we really mean it. We're very passionate about helping out, families specifically, and especially those that take their security seriously. So always happy to help if anyone reaches out.
That's awesome. So just so I know and everybody else knows, do you only help people in one area? Or are you guys able to take families from across the country? What's area can you serve?
Sure. So thankfully, we are able to do cyber, which is really our flagship offering. Again, we put together something truly unique and special on the cyber front that no one else is extending to the small businesses and families. Um, we're able to do that anywhere in the country, which is awesome. I'm also able to help with security assessments anywhere in the country. And the way I do it for folks that are not in Virginia is I give you a very robust, actually very similar to yours. You have a really good physical security assessment out there. I take a little bit of
Appreciate
a
it.
different approach with it, but I offer them that, which then gives them a scoring criteria that they give back to me that we punch into our software to actually illuminate the overall risk exposure, because we can do the cyber stuff obviously remotely. So allowing our clients to do the physical stuff themselves allows us to do that, and so we're able to do that. And then the way we work the electronic security stuff with people not in Virginia is we have trusted parties all across the country, different vendors of the security equipment and everything. And what I always tell people on the alarm side of the house, there's really not much that changes. At the end of the day, there's like 5 or 6 good central monitoring stations out there, and we're all hanging the same cameras and everything like that. But what I do often, and this isn't something we even charge for, like we just make sure people are putting them in the right place, and
Hmm.
simply trusting that the guy that this was the only job he could get is putting them in the right place isn't a very effective strategy. Unfortunately, I
Hmm.
learned this the hard way too. We just recently built a house, and the company that came out and did it put 3 of my 4 cameras in the worst place possible. And for those of you who think, oh, he just told us he has 4 cameras, that's what we started with. I'll leave it at that. But
Right.
we didn't start from a great place. So we had to do a lot of work on the back end to change that up and make our cameras actually work for us. So is my point. So,
Yeah, I remember I worked for a company that went into home alarm systems. And so I got the company to come out and put stuff on my house, and I was here for the install. And this is way before I ever started the Secure Dad. And it was just, a guy with, a couple of nodes and some double sided tape going around. And I'm thinking, I could totally do this. Like I could completely do, you don't even need to be here. Just give me the box, that sort of thing. Because I understand this just a little bit more than you do. I mean, obviously, this guy was very well meaning. It was very professional, but it was just like, man, I got you. Like, just leave the stuff here. I'm going to change it once you leave anyway. But yeah, but Gio, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate what you're doing. God bless you and your future, buddy.
thank you so much, Andy. Really appreciate this opportunity. Thank you for all you do as well.